I didn't think much of the rules when I first saw them. That was probably my first mistake. At the time, they seemed like the kind of thing old maintenance guys wrote down after spending too many years alone in one place. Half warning, half superstition. The kind of list you found taped inside a hunting cabin or pinned above the coffee machine in some forgotten ranger station. Don't flush both toilets at once. Don't kick the generator after midnight. Don't feed the raccoons unless you want them raising families in the walls. Things like that. I wish that was all it had been. I wish I had laughed, folded the paper back up, and left before dark. But I needed the money, and the job sounded simple. That was the word they used during the phone interview. Simple. Seasonal night security. Remote property. No visitors. No animals. Just me, a ring of old cameras, a radio that barely worked, and 37 empty cages. I was 29 when I took the job at Larkspur Wildlife Park. I had been laid off from a warehouse outside Billings 2 months before, after the company switched to some automated sorting system that kept breaking down but still somehow replaced 8 of us. I had rent due, a truck payment I was already behind on, and my mother's assisted living bills sitting on my kitchen counter in a neat stack I tried not to look at. My friend Trevor told me about the opening. Trevor worked trail maintenance for the National Park Service, mostly clearing deadfall and fixing signs people shot at for fun. He called me one night and said there was a caretaker position opening at a closed zoo on the north edge of Pine Hook National Park. I thought he was joking. A zoo? I asked. Not a real zoo anymore, he said. It's closed. Has been for years. Then why do they need security? Vandals. Squatters. Copper thieves. Teenagers daring each other to break into the reptile house. You know. The usual. Animals? Gone. All of them? That's what they told me. He said the place used to be privately owned, back when that kind of roadside animal park could get away with calling itself a sanctuary. Larkspur Wildlife Park had sat on a long stretch of county road between the park entrance and an old ski lodge that closed in the 90s. Families would stop there on the way to campgrounds. Kids could feed goats, see wolves behind chain link, take pictures with a sad black bear named Samson, then buy plastic snakes in the gift shop. Then the owner died, the permits got messy, and the remaining animals were transferred out. Or euthanized. Or sold. No one gave me the same version twice. The land was eventually absorbed into a buffer zone for the park, but the buildings were still there. The government moved slowly, especially when cleanup involved asbestos, fuel tanks, old veterinary drugs, and enclosures built before anyone cared about regulations. Until the demolition contract came through, somebody had to watch the property overnight. That somebody turned out to be me. The pay wasn't good, but it was steady. 40 hours a week. Night differential. No customers. No lifting heavy boxes. No supervisor breathing down my neck. I took it. The first time I drove out to Larkspur, I almost missed the turn. There was no bright sign anymore. Just 2 faded wooden posts and a sagging arch over a gravel drive. The original sign must have had painted animals on it once, but the weather had stripped most of them down to gray smears. I could still make out the word Larkspur in cracked blue letters. Under it, somebody had removed the words Wildlife Park and replaced them with a government sign. Property closed to public. No trespassing. National Park Service. The road past the sign ran through lodgepole pine for almost a mile before the trees opened into a gravel parking lot. The lot was bigger than I expected. Rows of cracked asphalt. Faded yellow lines. 2 old ticket booths near the entrance gate. A flagpole with no flag. A row of empty picnic tables chained together by the restrooms. Dry weeds grew up through everything. The zoo itself sat behind a tall chain-link fence with green privacy slats woven through it. Most of the slats were missing or hanging loose. Beyond the fence, I could see roofs, cages, narrow paths, hand-painted signs, and the shapes of fake rock formations turning black in the late afternoon light. It looked less abandoned than paused. That was the first thing that bothered me, although I didn't know why. Some abandoned places looked dead right away. Broken glass, graffiti, water damage, mattresses dragged into corners. Larkspur didn't look like that. It looked like everyone had walked out for lunch and never come back. The ticket booth still had sun-bleached brochures stacked inside. The ice cream sign still hung above the concession window. There were stroller marks in the dust near the gate. I parked beside a white Park Service pickup and got out. A man was waiting for me near the entrance, leaning against the fence with his arms crossed. He looked about 60, maybe older, though it was hard to tell. He had a narrow face, a gray mustache, and one of those bodies that looked built from wire and habit. He wore a brown jacket with the National Park Service patch on the shoulder, but it looked like it belonged to somebody else. Too clean. Too official for him. "You Wilkes?" he asked. "Nathan Wilkes," I said. He nodded once. "Walt Harlan." He didn't shake my hand. He just turned and unlocked the gate. Trevor had told me Walt was the site manager, though manager seemed like too formal a word. Walt had worked in and around Pinhook for over 30 years. Ranger, mechanic, fire lookout, winter caretaker, whatever needed doing. He was the kind of man who knew how to fix a radio with a pocket knife and electrical tape, and also the kind who looked like he had never been surprised by bad news in his life. I followed him through the gate. The inside of Larkspur smelled like wet leaves, old straw, rust, and something faintly sour underneath. Not rot exactly. More like a barn that had been cleaned too many times without ever becoming clean. Walt gave me the tour without wasting words. The entrance plaza had 2 ticket windows, a gift shop, bathrooms, and a small office that used to sell season passes. The main path looped around the property in a rough oval. The smaller animals had been near the front. Otter Pool. Fox Run. All cages. Raccoon exhibit. Porcupines. Farther back were the larger enclosures. Black bear habitat. Wolf Run. Mountain lion cage. Ungulate pasture. A small barn where they had kept goats, and one old donkey. Past that was the reptile house, a low concrete building with painted snakes along the outside walls. Most of the paint had peeled off, leaving the snakes looking like they were shedding. Behind the reptile house stood the veterinary trailer, quarantine building, feed shed, and a row of staff cabins that were no longer safe to sleep in. My post was in the old administration office beside the gift shop. It had 2 rooms. The front room held a desk, a dented filing cabinet, a microwave, a coffee maker, and a wall of monitors mounted above a metal shelf. The back room had a fuse panel, an old safe, boxes of paper records, and a narrow bathroom with a sink that coughed brown water if you turned it on too fast. There were 12 security cameras. Only 9 worked. "Camera 4 flickers," Walt said, pointing at the monitors. "Camera 7 freezes when it rains. Camera 12 is inside quarantine. Don't trust the timestamp on that one." I nodded. "Radio check at 10, midnight, 2:13, and 5:30, he said. "Dispatch doesn't always answer, but you answer if they call. Patrol once at the start of shift and once after 4. Otherwise stay near the office unless something needs checking." "What counts as something needing checking?" "Fire. Flood. Fence breach. Generator trouble. Anything with a person attached to it." He said person in a way I noticed. Not anyone. Not visitor. Person. I looked around the office. The monitors hummed softly. The air smelled like dust and burned coffee. On the desk was a thick binder labeled Night Log, a cheap ballpoint pen tied to the spine with string, and a gray radio charger. "That's it?" I asked. "That's the job. Seems quiet." "It is." He looked at me for a second after he said that, like he was checking whether I understood quiet and empty were not the same thing. I didn't. Walt trained me for 2 evenings. The first night was paperwork and keys. There were too many keys. Front gate. Office. Gift shop. Maintenance shed. Reptile house. Quarantine. Feed room. Electrical cage. Fuel tank lock. South service gate. A dozen others with tags so faded I could barely read them. The second night, he walked me through the routine. At 8, lock the entrance gate. Check the gift shop door. Check both bathroom doors. Walk the main loop clockwise. Write down any damaged locks, open windows, down branches, or animal activity. Animal activity meant actual animals. Raccoons, coyotes, owls, deer, sometimes a black bear from the national forest if the dumpsters weren't latched. At midnight, do a cage count from the camera monitors. At 2:13, answer the radio check. At 4, walk the loop again. At 5:30, unlock the main gate for the day crew. The day crew was usually 2 people. Angie, who handled records and environmental inspections, and a maintenance guy named Luis who came in 3 days a week. Walt floated in and out whenever he felt like it, which I later learned meant he watched everything and acted like he didn't. On the second night, after we finished the patrol, Walt took a folded sheet of paper from the desk drawer and handed it to me. It was yellow legal paper, soft at the creases, with handwriting in black ink. Not printed. Not official. Just written. I looked at the top. Night rules for empty cages. I almost smiled. Walt saw it. "Don't laugh," he said. "I wasn't. You were thinking about it." I looked at him. He didn't smile either. "Read them," he said. So I did. There were 7 rules. 1. Count the cages at 8 p.m., 12 a.m., and 4 a.m. There are 37 empty cages. If you count 38, do not count again. Write maintenance in the log and turn off the outside lights for 10 minutes. 2. Do not open the front gate between 10 p.m. and 5:45 a.m. for anyone. Park staff will flash headlights twice and honk once. Anything else waits outside. 3. If you hear animal sounds from an empty enclosure, do not look inside until morning. This includes scratching, pacing, wing beats, growling, coughing, or water splashing. 4. If camera 12 shows movement inside quarantine, turn the monitor toward the wall and write feed room secure in the log. Do not enter quarantine before sunrise. 5. Do not say any of the animal names out loud after dark. If a voice says your name from inside an enclosure, do not answer. 6. At 2:13 a.m., answer the radio with "Barks per night 1 clear." If the caller uses your full legal name, unplug the radio until 2:20. Do not speak again before then. 7. Before sunrise, place 1 scoop of dry feed in the silver bowl outside reptile house door B. Do not look into the bowl. If there are 2 bowls, return to the office and wait for Walt. I read the list twice. Then I looked at him. "Is this a hazing thing?" "No." "Trevor put you up to this?" "No. There aren't any animals here. That's why it says empty cages." I waited for him to explain. He didn't. "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice polite. "I need this job. I'm not trying to be difficult. But if there's something dangerous on the property, I should know what it is. Walt took the paper back from me, folded it carefully, and put it under the keyboard on the desk. You've got bears in the forest, he said. You've got people who break into closed places because they think nobody will notice. You've got old wiring, weak floors, and chemical storage. That's enough danger for one job. And the rules? The rules make the job easier. They sound like ghost stories. He looked at me then. Good, he said. Ghost stories keep people from doing stupid things. That was all I got from him. My first solo shift started the next night, a Thursday in late October. By then, the days were already short. The sun dropped behind the ridge around 6:30, and the temperature fell fast after that. I arrived at 7:15 with a thermos of coffee, 2 sandwiches, a flashlight, and the kind of confidence you only have before a place has taught you anything. Walt was in the office when I arrived, sitting at the desk with his jacket on and his hands wrapped around a paper cup. He had already turned on the monitors. The screens showed different angles of the zoo in grainy black and white. The front gate. Gift shop walkway. Otter pool. Bear habitat. Wolf run. Reptile house exterior. Feed shed. South fence. Quarantine interior. On camera 12, quarantine looked like a narrow room with a concrete floor and 3 kennel doors along one wall. There was nothing inside. Just a drain in the floor and a stack of plastic crates. Walt stood. Keys are on the hook. Log is open. Coffee maker works if you hit it right. Anything special tonight? Cold front coming in. Wind after midnight. That it? He looked around the office, then back at me. Read the rules once before 10. I almost said something sarcastic. I didn't. Okay. He put on his hat and walked to the door. At the threshold, he stopped. One more thing. I looked up. If you get scared, don't leave the office just to prove you're not. Then he went out. I watched him on the front gate camera. He crossed the entrance plaza, unlocked the main gate, drove his pickup out, then got out again to lock it behind him. His headlights flashed across the fence. Twice. Then one honk. I don't know why that made me uncomfortable. Probably because it matched the paper. I told myself that was the point. Walt had made a little ritual out of it, and now my brain was doing what brains do. Looking for patterns. Turning normal things into warnings. After his taillights disappeared down the driveway, I sat at the desk and listened to the building settle. That first hour was boring. Boring helped. I filled out the top of the night log. October 23rd. Weather clear, cold. Shift N. Wilkes. Gate locked, 2000. At 8, I locked the front gate again, even though Walt had already done it. The padlock was heavy and cold in my hand. Then I did my first patrol. The main path was paved but cracked, with pine needles gathered in every low spot. The zoo was smaller than it looked from the outside, but the dark made it feel stretched out. Every enclosure seemed farther from the next than it should have been. My flashlight beam moved over empty spaces. The otter pool was drained except for a few inches of rainwater black with leaves. The fox run had a plastic shelter turned on its side. The owl cages were just wire boxes with perches inside, all empty. The porcupine enclosure still had a sign warning children not to put fingers through the fence. At the bear habitat I stopped. It was a larger area with fake rock, dead logs, and a dry moat. A wooden sign hung near the railing. Samson. American black bear. 1998 to 2019. Below that, in smaller lettering, someone had painted, "He loved apples." It was the kind of detail that made the place feel less like a ruin and more like a memory someone had abandoned. I thought about Rule 5. Do not say any of the animal names out loud after dark. I didn't say Samson. I moved on. The wolf run was farther back, where the trees pressed close to the fence. It had a double layer of chain link, a concrete den box, and an old feeding chute. The sign there was turned away from the path, hanging by one screw. I didn't fix it. Something about that corner of the zoo made me hurry without realizing it. By the time I got back to the office, it was 8:40. I wrote, "First patrol complete. All locks secure. No activity." The rest of the evening went the way you would expect. I made bad coffee. I ate half a sandwich. I watched the monitors. A raccoon crossed camera 3 at 9:12, moving along the concession stand like it owned the place. At 9:48, wind pushed loose branches against the south fence. At 10 o'clock, I did the radio check. Piehook dispatch, this is Larkspur Night 1, radio check? Static. Then a woman's voice, distant but clear enough. Larkspur Night 1 copy. You're clear. I wrote it down. At 10:30 I read the rules again. I don't know why. Maybe because the office felt too quiet. Maybe because Walt had told me to. Maybe because there's something about being alone in a closed place that makes you want instructions, even stupid ones. I took the folded paper from under the keyboard and laid it flat beside the log. The handwriting was steady. Block letters. No corrections. I noticed then that the paper wasn't new. The edges were soft from being handled. There were faint stains on it, coffee or rainwater. Somebody had folded and unfolded that page a lot. At 11:06, the old receipt printer behind the desk clicked. I jumped. It was a small sound. One click, then a whir. The kind of noise a machine makes when it wakes up after being forgotten. I turned in the chair. The register system sat on a side counter, unplugged from anything useful but still connected to power. Walt had told me it was left over from the gift shop. They used it sometimes to print inventory tags because the office printer was broken. The little receipt printer was pushing out paper. I stared at it for a second, then stood and walked over. The screen on the register was dark. The printer stopped. A white receipt curled from the slot. I pulled it off. It said, Larkspur Wildlife Park. Admit one child. $6. Thank you for visiting. Under the date, where there should have been numbers, it had printed October 23rd. 11:06 p.m. I looked at the dark register screen. Then at the receipt. Then at the office door. I told myself it was just a glitch. Old electronics did weird things. Power surges. Bad wiring. Maybe the system printed whatever test receipt had been stuck in memory from years ago. The date was strange, but dates came from internal clocks. Those could be wrong or right for no reason. That would have made sense, except the receipt paper felt warm. Not room temperature. Warm, like somebody had just held it in their hand. I set it on the desk, wrote register printed old receipt in the log, then immediately felt stupid for writing it down. It looked childish on the page. At midnight I did the cage count. Walt had shown me how. There was a laminated map in the binder with every enclosure numbered. Not every building. Not every pen. Just the cages and holding areas that had once contained animals. 37. You could count them on patrol, but at night Walt said to use the cameras and map. Some were out of view, so you had to mark them by section. Front small animal row 6. Aviary row 5. Otter and raccoon 2. Bear 1. Wolf 1. Cat cages 3. Hoofstock pens 4. Barn stalls 5. Reptile house display rooms 6. Quarantine kennels 3. Temporary nursery cage 1. Total 37. Empty cages. I counted once. 37. I counted again. Still 37. I wrote 0000 count complete. 37. Then the water splashed on camera 3. I heard it before I saw it. Not loud. Just a soft plunk through the thin office wall, carried by the monitor speaker that was supposed to be muted. Camera 3 showed the otter pool. The drained otter pool. The camera view was dim, but I could see the curved concrete basin, the little artificial waterfall, the glass viewing panel. There were leaves gathered at the bottom and a shallow puddle near the drain. Another splash came through the speaker. This time I saw ripples. I leaned closer to the monitor. Something moved in the dark water. Not much. Just a line, like a tail cutting through the puddle. Then the rule came back to me before I moved. If you hear animal sounds from an empty enclosure, do not look inside until morning. I was already looking at the camera, which felt like cheating. The rule said enclosure. It didn't say monitor. I told myself a raccoon had gotten into the pool. Or a cat. Something small. Something that could make water move in a drained exhibit. On the screen, a wet shape climbed onto the concrete ledge. I only saw it for a second before the camera flickered. It was low to the ground. Long-bodied. Too smooth. Then the screen cut to static. I sat back. The static hissed. I reached for the mouse and clicked camera 3 off. My hand was shaking. I didn't mention it to anyone that night. Not out loud. In the log I wrote, camera 3 lost signal after water disturbance. Check in morning. Then I turned the monitor volume all the way down. I stayed in the office until 4. Nothing else happened for a while, and somehow that made it worse. A loud noise would have given me something to respond to. A person at the gate, an alarm, a fallen branch, even an actual animal. Instead there was only the office, the humming monitors, the coffee getting cold, and a receipt sitting beside the log like evidence from a minor crime. At 2:13, the radio crackled. I was ready for it. The sound still made my chest tighten. I picked up the microphone. Larkspur Night 1 clear. For a moment, just static. Then the same woman from dispatch. Copy, Larkspur Night 1. That was it. No full name. No weird voice. No reason to unplug anything. By 4 I had relaxed enough to feel embarrassed. I did the second cage count from the monitors. 37. I went out for the 4 o'clock patrol because the log required it, and because I didn't want Walt asking why I skipped it on my first night. The cold hit me hard. The path glittered with frost. My breath moved ahead of me in white clouds. The zoo felt different at that hour. Not darker exactly. More awake. I kept my flashlight low. I checked the gift shop. Bathrooms. Small animal row. When I reached the outer pool, I stopped on the path. The pool was quiet. The puddle at the bottom had frozen at the edges. Leaves lay flat in the water. I shined the flashlight across the concrete ledge where I thought I had seen something climb out. There were wet tracks there. Not raccoon tracks. Not paw prints. Just smooth marks, close together, like someone had dragged 2 wet hands across the concrete. They ended at the fence. Then disappeared. I backed away. I finished the patrol too fast and got back to the office sweating under my coat. At 5:30, I did the final radio check. At 5:45, I unlocked the gate. Walt arrived at 6:01. He came in carrying a paper cup of gas station coffee, looked at me once, then looked at the log. You wrote a lot, he said. Things happened. That tends to happen at night. He read the entry about the register. Then the camera 3 disturbance. Then the wet tracks. His face didn't change. What was in the outer pool? I asked. Did you go inside the enclosure? No. Good. That's not an answer. It's the answer that matters. I waited. He turned the page in the log, even though there was nothing else to read. Camera 3 does that sometimes. It makes water splash? Sometimes. What does that mean? It means don't go inside the enclosure. I wanted to quit right there. I really did. But quitting feels different at sunrise than it does at midnight. In the gray morning, with Walt standing there drinking coffee and the sky getting pale over the pine trees, the whole night already felt less solid. The receipt was still on the desk, though. I picked it up. Did this print because of old wiring? Walt took it from me. He looked at it for a long time. Then he folded it once and put it in his jacket pocket. Don't keep things it gives you, he said. I stared at him. What gives me? He looked tired then. Not scared. Tired. The night, he said. That was the first time I thought Walt might not be trying to scare me. The next 2 shifts were quiet. Not normal exactly, but quiet. The register didn't print again. Camera 3 came back on like nothing had happened. The otter pool looked dry. The wet tracks were gone by the time Angie arrived and walked the property with me. She was in her 40s, with curly hair tied under a knit cap and a way of talking that made every sentence sound like she was already late for something. She handled most of the transition paperwork for the park. Permits, animal transfer records, cleanup contracts, environmental reports. When I asked her whether the otter pool camera had issues, she shrugged. All these cameras have issues. Ever see anything weird on them? Define weird. Movement where there shouldn't be any. She laughed without looking at me. This place is full of mice, Nate. I didn't tell her about the thing in the water. I asked about the animal names instead. Were the animals all named? I said. Most of them. The owner was big on that. Made the place feel friendly. Do people still use the names? Not really. Why? No reason. She looked at me then, just for a second. You working nights with Walt? Walt trained me. I'm solo now. Her expression changed in a way I couldn't read. He give you the paper? I didn't answer right away. She took that as yes. Follow it, she said. Then she went back to checking a padlock on the barn. That was all. No explanation. Just follow it. By my 4th shift, I had memorized the routine. That's how jobs get inside you. Even strange ones. You do the same tasks at the same times, and eventually your body starts moving before you decide to move it. 7:15 arrive. 7:20 coffee. 7:30 check monitors. 8 gate. 8:10 patrol. 10 radio. Midnight count. 2:13 radio. 4 count and patrol. 5:30 radio. 5:45 gate. The repetition helped. It also made every small change stand out. On Sunday night the chair moved. There was a metal folding chair inside the gift shop, behind the counter near the old plush animals. I noticed it on my first patrol because my flashlight caught the seat. It was facing the wall. That bothered me for no good reason. The gift shop had big front windows with metal grates on the inside. I stood outside and shined the light through. The chair sat behind the register counter, turned toward the back wall, as if someone had been sitting there staring at the shelves. I checked the door. Locked. I checked the window. Locked. I wrote it down. At midnight, after my cage count, I looked at camera 2, which showed the gift shop entrance. The chair was now facing the window. I couldn't see it directly through the camera, not fully. Just the back legs and part of the seat through the glass. But it had moved. I knew it had. The office was only 20 yards from the gift shop. I could have stepped outside, crossed the plaza, unlocked the door, and checked. I even took the keys off the hook. Then I stood there listening to them jingle in my hand. There was no rule about chairs. No rule about the gift shop. No rule about furniture moving by itself. But Rule 2 said not to open the front gate. Rule 3 said not to look inside an enclosure. Rule 5 said not to say names. Nothing about the gift shop. That was how I almost talked myself into going. Then I noticed something on the monitor. The gift shop window reflected the entrance plaza. In the reflection, I could see the office door. I could see myself standing in it. Only I wasn't standing in the office door. I was standing at the desk. I looked from the monitor to the actual door. The doorway was empty. On the screen, the reflected version of me lifted one hand and pointed toward the gift shop. I put the keys back on the hook. The chair stayed facing the window until sunrise. When I checked the gift shop with Walt in the morning, it was facing the wall again. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. That was the pattern for the next week. Something small would happen, and the day would erase it. A sign would hang crooked at 3 in the morning and straight again by 6. The radio would click like someone was pressing the transmit button, but no voice would come through. The cameras would show dark shapes too far back in empty cages to identify. Once, at 1:40, the microwave turned on by itself for 9 seconds. When I opened it, there was nothing inside. The plate was warm. I told myself each thing had a normal explanation. Bad wiring. Loose screws. Raccoons. Stress. The human brain hates empty space. It fills gaps with whatever is available. I had been alone too much. Sleeping during the day. Living on coffee and vending machine food. Listening to old buildings creak while watching gray screens. That explanation worked until the night something used my mother's voice. It was my 8th solo shift. Snow had started around sunset. Not heavy, but steady. The kind of dry mountain snow that looks harmless until you realize it has been falling for hours. By 10, the parking lot was white. The front gate camera showed flakes blowing sideways through the floodlights. The road beyond the gate disappeared into dark trees. At 10:30, the phone rang. Not the radio. The office phone. I hadn't even known it worked. It was a beige wall phone mounted near the bathroom door, with a coiled cord stretched almost straight from years of use. Walt had said the landline was dead. Just another thing nobody bothered to remove. It rang once. I stared at it. It rang again. The sound was too loud in the small office. On the third ring, I picked it up without thinking. Larkspur, I said. There was static, but not phone static. It sounded like wind moving across an open microphone. Then my mother said, "Nate?" I didn't answer. My mother's voice was softer than it used to be. The assisted living facility called me once or twice a week, usually about bills or medication changes. Sometimes she called from the common room phone if an aide helped her. She had early dementia. Some days she knew exactly where she was. Other days she thought I was still in high school. This sounded like a good day. "Nate, honey?" I held the receiver away from my ear. The office seemed to lean in around me. "Nate," she said again. "I don't like the animals here." I hung up. Not gently. I slammed the receiver into the cradle hard enough to rattle the whole phone. Then I stood there with both hands on the wall, breathing like I had run up a hill. The phone rang again. I backed away. It rang 4 times and stopped. I looked at the rules. Rule 5. If a voice says your name from inside an enclosure, do not answer. This hadn't been inside an enclosure. It had been on the phone. That was the kind of loophole your mind looks for when it wants comfort. It didn't help. A few minutes later, camera 6 flickered. Camera 6 showed the wolf run. At first, I thought it had gone out. The screen was almost black except for snow catching the infrared light. Then something moved near the den box. A figure stood behind the fence. A woman in a light blue robe. She was small, hunched against the cold, with one hand on the chain link. My mother had a robe like that. Not the same one, I told myself. Just similar. The figure lifted her face toward the camera. The picture distorted, rolling once from bottom to top. When it cleared, the fence was empty. I did not go outside. I did not call the facility. I did not write it in the log. I sat in the office chair with my coat on and watched the clock until 2:13. When the radio crackled, I almost unplugged it before anyone spoke. But the rules said answer. So I did. Larkspur Night 1 clear. Static. Then the dispatcher said, "Copy, Larkspur Night 1. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Then a second voice came through under hers. Small. Far away. Nathan Robert Wilkes. My full legal name. I dropped the microphone. It hit the desk and swung from the cord. The radio kept hissing. Nathan Robert Wilkes, the voice said again. It was not my mother that time. It was my own voice. Or close enough. I grabbed the radio base, yanked the power cord from the wall, and stepped back so fast the chair tipped over. The office went quiet. Not regular quiet. Vacuum quiet. The kind where you hear the blood in your ears. I watched the clock. 2:14. 2:15. 2:16. 2:17. The minute hand clicked into place. From somewhere outside, deep in the zoo, an animal coughed. It sounded like a man trying to clear his throat. Then another cough answered it. Closer. I looked at the radio cord in my hand. 2:18. A scraping noise came from the wall behind the monitors. I told myself mice. Then the scraping moved lower. Inside the wall. Behind the desk. Something tapped once under the floor. I stared at the floorboards. There were no floorboards. The office had old linoleum over concrete. It tapped again. From underneath. 2:19. The rules said do not speak before 2:20. I hadn't realized I was whispering until I heard myself. Come on, I said. Just those 2 words. Soft. Barely anything. The tapping stopped. Every monitor went black at once. For 1 second, the office was lit only by the clock and the red emergency light above the door. Then all 9 monitors came back. Each screen showed the same thing. The front gate. But not from the camera mounted on the ticket booth. This view was from outside the property, looking in. Through the bars, I saw the office window. In the window, I saw myself standing at the desk. Behind me, very slowly, the gift shop chair turned to face the glass. The clock clicked. 2:20. I plugged the radio back in. The screens returned to normal one by one. I didn't sit down again until 3. At sunrise, Walt found me in the office with every light on. He looked at the log. There was nothing there about the phone. Nothing about my mother. Nothing about the radio. Rough night? He asked. I laughed once, but it came out wrong. Does dispatch know my full name? No. Does this place have a working phone? No. It rang. Walt took off his hat and set it on the desk. What did you do? I hung up. Did you answer when it said your name? No. He watched me for a second. Good. It sounded like my mother. They use what gets you to turn around. What are they? He looked toward the monitors. The morning light made the screens hard to see. I don't know, he said. It was the first honest answer he gave me. I should have quit after that. Anyone listening to this is probably thinking that. Why didn't you just leave? Why keep going back? Why spend one more night in a closed zoo where the empty cages make phone calls with your mother's voice? The answer is simple, and I'm not proud of it. I needed the money. Also, nothing had touched me. That sounds insane now, but at the time it mattered. Whatever was happening stayed just outside the line. It spoke. It moved things. It showed me things. It used the cameras. But it didn't come into the office. It didn't break the locks. It didn't chase me. The rules worked. That made the danger feel manageable. Follow the rules, get paid, go home. People stay in bad jobs for less. Walt started coming in earlier after that. He never said he was checking on me, but he was. He'd arrive around 5:15 instead of 6, walk the property with me after sunrise, and act like he just happened to be there. I asked him once how long he had been following the rules. He said, "Longer than I've been old." I asked who wrote them. He said, "People who didn't have them." I stopped asking for a while. By early November, the snows settled in. The park road closed beyond the maintenance turnout, which meant almost nobody drove past Larkspur at night. The world shrank to the office, the loop path, the frozen parking lot, and the black walls of pine trees around the fence. Routine became everything. At 8 I counted from the path. 37. At midnight I counted from the monitors. 37. At 4 I counted again. 37. The count was the worst part because it made me look at every enclosure long enough to notice changes. A rope swinging in the empty goat barn. A light under the reptile house door. A smear on the inside of the bear habitat glass. Not blood. Not mud. Something pale, dragged across the glass from the inside by fingers too wide to be fingers. I logged what the rules told me to log. Maintenance. Feed room secure. 37. Clear. Secure. No activity. Those words became a language that meant the opposite of what they said. On November 11th, I counted 38. It happened at midnight. I remember the date because it was the first time the rules stopped being strange and became instructions I needed more than my own judgment. The first count gave me 37. The second gave me 38. I froze with my pen in my hand. The extra cage was on camera 9, near the south fence. Camera 9 covered a service path behind the old barn, an area I rarely looked at except during counts. There were supposed to be 3 holding pens there. Small ones? Temporary enclosures with metal frames and wire tops, used for sick goats, or new arrivals. That night there were 4. I stared at the screen. The 4th pen sat at the end of the row, partly under a pine tree. It looked old. Same rusted metal. Same square shape. Same latch. Snow lay on top of it, which meant it had not just been dragged there. But it had not been there at 8. I knew it. I looked at the map. The south holding row had 3 cages. I looked back at the monitor. 4. My first instinct was to count again. Of course it was. Anyone would. When numbers don't match, you recount. That is exactly what the rule told me not to do. If you count 38, do not count again. Write maintenance in the log and turn off the outside lights for 10 minutes. My hand moved slowly. I wrote 0000 count. Maintenance. Then I stood and went to the breaker panel. The outside lights were labeled in blue tape. Plaza. Loop. Rear. Service. Reptile. Flood. Walt had shown me which switch controlled all of them. I flipped it down. The zoo vanished from the monitors. Not completely. The infrared still worked on some cameras, but the floodlights went out, and with them the hard white glare that made the paths look safe. The office window turned black. I stood by the breaker panel for 10 minutes with my flashlight in my hand. At first, nothing happened. Then the cages started making noise. Not all at once. One at a time. A soft scrape from the owl cages. A chain rattle near the bear habitat. A thump from the barn. Something heavy pacing in the wolf run. Water splashing in the otter pool. Tiny claws on glass from inside the reptile house. The sounds were not loud. That made them worse. They sounded casual, almost bored. Like animals moving around after being locked away all day. I kept my eyes on the clock. 5 minutes. 6. 7. On camera 9, the fourth holding pen had become a darker square in the snow. Something inside it moved. Not much. Just a shift of weight. The pen was too small for a person to stand in. Whatever was inside stood anyway. The top of its head brushed the wire roof. I turned away from the monitor. At 10 minutes, I flipped the lights back on. The sound stopped. Camera 9 showed 3 holding pens. Only 3. Snow lay smooth where the fourth had been. No tracks. No mark. I sat down and realized I had been holding my breath so long my ribs hurt. At 5:30, Walt came in through the front gate without using his truck. I saw him on the camera walking up the driveway through the snow, his hat low, his hands in his pockets. That should have bothered me. It did. But I was so relieved to see another person that I almost opened the office door before remembering Rule 2. Do not open the front gate between 10 p.m. and 5:45 a.m. for anyone. Park staff will flash headlights twice and honk once. Anything else waits outside. Walt stood on the other side of the entrance gate and looked toward the office camera. He lifted one hand. The radio crackled. "Nate," Walt's voice said. "Let me in." Truck died up the road. I stared at the screen. He looked cold. His shoulders were hunched. Snow gathered on his hat brim. "Nate," he said again over the radio. "Come on. It's freezing." I looked at the clock. 5:31. "Walt?" I said. My hand was already on the microphone. I hadn't pressed the button. The radio sat untouched on the desk. On the monitor, Walt smiled. Not a big smile. Just enough. I stepped back from the desk. The voice came again. "I know you can hear me." On the screen, Walt reached through the bars of the gate with one arm. His sleeve caught on the chain link. He pulled and pulled, and his arm stretched farther through than it should have. Not breaking. Not bending. Just longer. His fingers reached the padlock. I went to the breaker panel and turned off the plaza light. When the monitor adjusted, the gate was empty. At 5:46, Walt's truck turned into the lot. Headlights flashed twice. One honk. I waited another full minute before opening the gate. The rail Walt stepped out, looked at my face, and said, "You counted 38. Not a question." I nodded. He looked toward the rear of the zoo. "You turned the lights off?" "Yes." "Good. Something came to the gate looking like you." He rubbed his jaw. "Did you open it?" "No." "Did you talk to it?" "I said your name." Walt looked at me sharply. Into the radio? No. I didn't press anything. His face eased a little, but not much. Don't say names after dark. That rule says animal names. No, he said. I waited. He looked toward the office window, then at the lightening sky. No, it doesn't. I didn't understand what he meant until later. That morning, after Walt left to check the south fence, I took the rules out again. Rule 5. Do not say any of the animal names out loud after dark. If a voice says your name from inside an enclosure, do not answer. I read it carefully. I had focused on the first sentence. Animal names. Samson. The bear. The wolves. The donkey. The otters. But Walt was right. The second sentence did not say animal. It just said name. I thought the rule was about keeping me from calling things out of their cages. I had it backwards. It was about keeping them from finding out what names worked. After that, I stopped saying names at Larkspur after sundown. Not Walt's. Not Angie's. Not my own. I stopped listening to music because singers said names in songs. I stopped calling my mother from the office parking lot before shift because I didn't want her voice anywhere near that fence. I stopped reading the animal signs. That last part was harder than it sounds. The signs were everywhere. Every enclosure had one, and most had little biographies written in friendly language for children. Mila. Red fox. Loves grapes and hiding shoes. Henry. Great horned owl. Cannot return to the wild due to wing injury. Old man dusk. Gray wolf. Born at Larkspur in 2007. Rosie. American alligator. Please do not tap on glass. The names began to feel less like labels and more like bait. I started walking patrol with my light aimed at the ground. The week after the false Walt came to the gate, I finally asked Angie what had happened to the animals. She was in the office filing transfer records into banker boxes. It was late afternoon, before my shift, and the sky outside was already turning gray. I thought you read the files, she said. Some. Then you know. I know what the records say. Transferred to other facilities. That's what happened. All of them? She didn't answer right away. The silence was enough. Some died before transfer, she said. How many? Nate. I work here alone at night. I think I get to ask. She set down the folder. Larkspur was a mess by the end. Worse than the reports made it sound. The owner got sick. Staff quit. Food deliveries stopped. A lot of animals were old. Some were already in bad condition. So how many died? A lot. In the cages? She looked at the monitors. Some. Is that what this is about? I don't know what this is about. But you know the rules. I know I don't work nights. That ended the conversation. Still, she must have felt bad, because before she left, she gave me a box of old records that had been set aside for scanning. Don't take them home, she said. Walt gets weird about records leaving the property. But you can read them here if you need to keep yourself busy. That night, I read through animal transfer files until my eyes hurt. Most were boring. Vaccination forms. Transport permits. Medical histories. Diet sheets. There were incident reports too. Escaped raccoon recovered. Goat bite minor. Child scratched by peacock, parent refused treatment. Bear refused food, vet notified. Wolf pacing at night, cause unknown. The older reports were handwritten. The newer ones were printed from a system with missing fields and wrong dates. One file had no label. Inside was a copy of a newspaper clipping from 8 years earlier. Local wildlife park faces investigation after winter closure. I read the article twice. It said Larkspur had closed early that season due to weather and financial issues. A caretaker had been hired to remain on site, but county officials were unable to reach him after a storm knocked out power. When they finally accessed the property, they found several animals dead from exposure and neglect. The article did not name the caretaker. It said the investigation was ongoing. Behind the clipping were 3 pages from a logbook. Not the current night log. An older one. The handwriting was different from Walt's. Shakier. The entries were dated January, 8 years earlier. They started normal. Snow heavy. Fed all. Generator running rough. Then, heard bear moving after confirmed dead. Did not check. Then, count wrong again. There are too many. Then, I hear them walking when lights go out. The last entry was only 1 line. If the cages are empty, why do they keep asking to be fed? I closed the folder. The office felt colder than it had a minute before. At midnight I counted 37. I did not read any more records that night. The strange thing about fear is that it becomes part of the routine too. By my 3rd week, I was still scared, but the fear had shape. It lived in certain times and certain places. Midnight counts. 2:13 radio checks. The walk past the Wolf Run. The silver bowl outside the reptile house. I haven't talked much about the bowl yet because for a while, it was the least frightening rule. Before sunrise, place 1 scoop of dry feed in the silver bowl outside reptile house door B. Do not look into the bowl. If there are 2 bowls, return to the office and wait for Walt. The feed was kept in a plastic bin in the office closet. Walt said it was just dry carnivore kibble left over from the zoo days. It smelled awful, oily and stale, but it looked harmless. Each morning, around 5:15, I would fill a metal scoop, walk to the reptile house service door, and dump the kibble into the bowl without looking down. The first few times, I felt ridiculous. Then I noticed the bowl was always empty by sunrise. Not clean. Empty. No crumbs. No snow inside it, even on storm nights. Just an empty silver bowl on the concrete step. I asked Walt once why we fed something if there were no animals. He said, "Because hungry things wander." That was his whole explanation. On November 19th, there were 2 bowls. It was still dark when I went out. The sky had that flat black look it gets before snow, and the air smelled metallic. My flashlight beam shook a little because my hands were cold. I walked the main loop to the reptile house. Door B was on the side of the building, down a narrow service path between the reptile house and the old quarantine yard. The concrete wall had a faded mural of a green snake curling around painted leaves. Its eyes had been scratched out years ago. I kept my head up like always. The silver bowl sat on the step. Beside it was another bowl. Same size. Same shape. Same dull reflection in the flashlight glow. For a few seconds I just stood there. The scoop of kibble felt heavy in my hand. Rule 7 was clear. If there are 2 bowls, return to the office and wait for Walt. I should have turned around immediately. Instead, I looked at the second bowl. Not into it. At it. There is a difference, and at the time I decided that difference mattered. Something was written on the side in black marker. Nate. My throat tightened. The marker looked fresh. I took 1 step back. From inside the reptile house, something tapped on the door. 3 light taps. Not claws. Knuckles. I turned and walked back to the office without running. Running would have felt like admitting something, and part of me still believed that if I moved calmly, the night had to respect that. Halfway across the plaza, the office phone rang. I did not answer. It rang until I got inside. The moment I shut the office door, it stopped. I locked the door. Then I called Walt from my cell phone. No signal. There was almost never signal out there, but I tried anyway. I held the phone near the window. One bar appeared, disappeared, appeared again. I tried calling. It failed. At 5:30, the radio clicked. I expected dispatch. Instead, Walt said, "You saw too." His voice was low and full of static. I grabbed the microphone before I could stop myself. "Where are you?" Static. Then, "Don't use the gate." "What?" "Don't use the gate when you leave." The signal broke. I waited for it to come back. It didn't. At 5:45, I did not unlock the front gate. The cameras showed the parking lot empty. The road beyond the gate was dark. At 6, no Walt. At 6:30, no day crew. By 7, the sun should have been up, but the whole property stayed gray, like morning had gotten stuck behind the clouds. The office clock read 7:12. My phone read 5:18. That was when I started to panic. I checked every clock I had. Office clock 7:13. Microwave 2:17. Register screen blank. Cell phone 5:18. Radio display midnight. Outside, the sky did not brighten. I tried the office door. It opened. The plaza looked normal at first. Then I saw the front gate. It was gone. Not open. Not broken. Gone. The fence ran unbroken across the entrance where the gate should have been. Chain link, privacy slats, frost, barbed wire top. Continuous. As if there had never been a gate there at all. Beyond it, the parking lot was gone too. Just trees. Pines standing close together, dark and wet with snow. I shut the office door. I remember laughing then. Not because anything was funny. Because my mind hit something it could not climb over and made the wrong sound. I went to the monitor wall. Camera 1 should have shown the front gate. It showed a cage. A small one. Metal bars. Concrete floor. A water dish in the corner. Empty. Camera 2 showed another cage. Camera 3 another. All 9 working cameras showed cages I did not recognize. Some were old. Some looked new. Some were wood. Some wire. Some glass. One looked like a child's bedroom with bars over the window. All empty. On camera 12, quarantine was still quarantine. The room was empty except for one thing. A silver bowl sat in the middle of the floor. I turned the monitor toward the wall. Then I wrote feed room secure in the log because the rule told me to. My handwriting barely looked like mine. I don't know how long I sat there. Time didn't behave properly. The clock ticked, but the minutes did not feel connected. I would look up and see 7:14. Then 7:14 again. Then 5:19 on my phone. Then 2:17 on the microwave. The landline rang 3 times. Stopped. Rang once. Stopped. The receipt printer clicked. I did not look at it. Something scratched at the office door. Not hard. Just a slow drag from top to bottom. Then a voice said, "Night 1?" A woman's voice. "Dispatch." I didn't answer. "Larkspur Night 1, do you copy?" It was coming from outside the door, not the radio. "Night 1, confirm status." I held my hands over my mouth. "Please confirm your name." The voice stayed gentle. Professional. Patient. "Please confirm your full legal name." The scratching started again. This time, on the window. I kept my eyes on the desk. I don't know what would have happened if Walt hadn't arrived. At least, I think it was Walt. The sound came from the back room first. A knock from inside the wall behind the fuse panel. Then another. Then a scraping noise, followed by Walt's voice, rough and annoyed. Open the closet. I did not move. Nate, he said. Open the damn closet. My name. The rule. My whole body went cold. He must have known, because he swore under his breath. Fine. Don't answer. Just listen. The office door rattled softly. The dispatch voice outside said, Confirm your full legal name. Walt's voice came from the closet wall. Back room. Floor hatch. Under the rubber mat. There was a rubber mat in the back room, in front of the fuse panel. I had stood on it 100 times. I moved without speaking. The mat was heavy and stiff. Under it was a square metal hatch with a recessed handle. I had never noticed it because the edges were painted the same gray as the floor. I lifted it. Cold air came up from below. Not basement air. Outside air. There was a ladder bolted into concrete, leading down into darkness. From the office door, the dispatch voice said, Night 1, we can help you if you confirm. I climbed down. The ladder dropped maybe 6 feet into a narrow utility tunnel. My flashlight showed concrete walls, old pipes, cobwebs, and a dirt floor covered in animal tracks. Too many animal tracks. Hooves. Paws. Claws. Bare feet. All pressed into the same damp dirt, going in both directions. I wanted to turn back. Then something above me opened the office door. I did not look up. I moved down the tunnel crouched over, following the beam of my flashlight. Behind me, something heavy breathed through the open hatch. The tunnel ran under the zoo. I know how that sounds. I didn't know it existed either. Walt later said it had been built for water and electrical access, back when the property was expanded too fast and nobody wanted to trench through the paths. It connected the office, gift shop, reptile house, quarantine, and the old veterinary trailer. He used it sometimes. He said everyone who lasted more than a week learned about it. Nobody had shown me because nobody expected me to last more than a week. The tunnel ended at a wooden door. A line of gray light showed under it. I pushed it open and stepped into the feed shed. Walt was there. The real Walt. I think. He stood beside a stack of empty feed bags with his shotgun in one hand, though I never saw him fire it, and I don't know if it was loaded. His face looked older than it had the day before. He put one finger to his lips. Then he pointed to the side door. We waited. Outside, something walked past the feed shed. Slow steps. 2 legs. Dragging one hand along the metal siding. It paused by the door. I could see the shadow of its feet under the gap. Bare. Long. One toe tapped the ground twice. Then it moved on. Walt waited another full minute. Then he leaned close and whispered, When I open the door, you go left. Don't look at the cages. Don't look at the bull. Don't look at anything that knows you. We went left. The world outside was wrong. It was not fully night, and not morning. The zoo looked faded, drained, like an old photograph left in rain. The paths were longer than they should have been. The enclosures stood too close together, and too far apart at the same time. Every cage door was open. Every cage was empty. Walt walked fast for a man his age. I followed him with my eyes on the back of his jacket. We did not go to the front gate. We went to the South Service fence. There was a narrow maintenance gate there, hidden behind the barn, locked with a chain and a Park Service padlock. Beyond it was a steep service road that connected to an old fire trail. The gate was still there. Walt unlocked it. Go, he said. What about you? He looked back toward the zoo. I have to close. Something called his name from the wolf run. Not Walt. His full name. Walter Elias Harlan. He flinched like he had been slapped. Then he shoved me through the gate and locked it behind me. Drive home, he said. Don't stop if you see me on the road. I did what he said. I followed the service road through the trees until it met the county road 2 miles downhill. My truck was parked on the shoulder there, engine cold, keys under the floor mat. I don't know who moved it. I drove home with the heater blasting and my hands numb on the wheel. My phone came back to normal around 8:30. There were no missed calls. No messages. No proof that I had spent almost 3 hours inside a place that had misplaced its own front gate. I slept for 14 hours. When I woke up, Walt had left me one voicemail. His voice sounded normal. Take 2 nights off, he said. Come in Monday if you still want the job. That was it. I told myself I wasn't going back. I said it out loud in my apartment. I'm not going back. I said it again while making coffee. Again while looking at my bank account. Again while listening to a voicemail from my mother's facility about an increase in monthly care fees. On Monday, I drove back to Larkspur. I hated myself for it. But I went. Walt was waiting in the parking lot, leaning against the fence like he had the first day. The front gate was there. Of course it was. The parking lot was there too. The ticket booths. The sign. The cracked asphalt. Everything looked ordinary in the weak afternoon light. Walt watched me get out of the truck. You came back, he said. I'm stupid. No. Just broke. That almost made me laugh. Almost. We walked the property before dark. He showed me the south service gate properly this time. Then the tunnel hatch. Then the old manual switch for the outside lights. Then a second radio hidden in the feed shed. He talked more than he ever had. Not enough, but more. He said Larkspur had been wrong long before the animals died. He didn't know when it started. Maybe when the owner built cages over ground that should not have been disturbed. Maybe when too many animals died in one winter. Maybe when visitors stopped coming and the place got hungry for attention. He used phrases like that. The place got hungry. The cages learned. The night listens better than we do. I asked why the park didn't tear it down. He said they tried once. The demolition crew made it as far as the reptile house. On the first day, an excavator operator climbed down from his machine, walked into an empty enclosure, and locked the door from the inside. He refused to come out until sunrise. When they opened it, he had no memory of doing it. After that, the contract got delayed. Then reviewed. Then buried. Government work. I asked why there had to be a night guard at all. Walt looked at the cages. Because if nobody watches them, he said, they don't stay empty. That was the closest thing to an explanation I ever got. That night, Walt stayed through my whole shift. Nothing happened. Not one thing. The cameras worked. The radio checks were normal. The bowl was empty by morning. There were 37 cages every time we counted. That was the false normal. I know that now. The place was showing me how easy it could be. How silly I would sound if I tried to explain it to someone. An empty zoo. Old cameras. A man who believed in rules. A few bad nights. Stress. Sleep deprivation. Bad memories. By the end of that quiet shift, part of me wanted to believe nothing would happen again. That part of me was useful. It let me keep working. For almost 3 weeks, the nights became manageable. Not safe. Manageable. The zoo still made sounds. The otter pools still splash sometimes. Once, camera 12 showed a deer standing inside quarantine, though the door was locked and there were no hoofprints in the snow. I turned the monitor around and wrote feed room secure. Once, at 2:13, the radio caller breathed for a long time before saying, "Clear." I unplugged it anyway because I didn't like the breath. Once, the receipt printer produced a ticket that said senior admission and my mother's birth date. Walt burned that one in a coffee can outside the office. But I got through the shifts. The rules held. Then Trevor came to see me. That was the beginning of the end, I think. It was December 6th. A Friday. He showed up around 7:30 in the evening, before I locked the gate. He was driving a Park Service truck with a cracked windshield and a snow shovel strapped in the bed. I hadn't seen him since I started the job. Our schedules were opposite, and I had stopped answering most calls because I was either sleeping or pretending to. He grinned when he stepped out. "Look at you," he said. "Night zoo man." "Don't call me that. You look terrible." "Thanks." He leaned on the truck door and looked past me at the entrance gate. "So? Is it haunted?" I didn't answer fast enough. His smile faded a little. "Wait. Seriously? No. You sure? I'm tired. Walt scare you with his rules?" I looked at him. "You knew about those? Everybody knows Walt has rules. You didn't mention them. I thought it was just Walt being Walt." That was believable. Trevor was good at missing things he didn't want to deal with. He said he had been sent to check a fallen tree on the service road and figured he would stop by. He brought gas station burritos and a 6-pack of soda. For 10 minutes, standing in the cold parking lot with another normal person, the job felt almost funny. Then he asked if he could see inside. "No," I said. "Come on. Property's closed. I work for the park. Not here." He laughed. "You serious?" "Yes." He studied my face. "Nate, what the hell is going on?" I should have told him to leave. I should have locked the gate then. Instead, I gave him the short version. Not everything. Not the phone with my mother's voice. Not the missing gate. Not the tunnel. But enough. Cameras. Sounds. Rules. 38 cages. The bull. He listened without interrupting, which was how I knew he didn't believe me. When I finished, he looked through the fence toward the plaza. "And you're still working here?" "I need the money. You need sleep." "I know what I need." He sighed. "Let me talk to Walt." "No." "Then let me come in for an hour." "No." "Just to see the setup." "No." His expression hardened. "You don't have to do the tough guy thing with me." "I'm not." "Then open the gate." The light was almost gone by then. The rules said lock the gate at 8, but Rule 2 said do not open it between 10 and 5:45. It was not 10 yet. That was how I justified it. I opened the gate. Trevor drove through and parked near the ticket booth. I told myself it was fine. He was park staff. It was before 10. He was my friend. The rules allowed it. But the zoo went quiet when he crossed the line. Not silent. Quiet in a way that felt attentive. Trevor came into the office and looked around. "This is it? This is it." He pointed at the monitors. "Which one's the creepy one?" "None of them right now." He picked up the rules sheet before I could stop him. "Night rules for empty cages," he read, smiling. "Put it down. Do not say animal names out loud after dark," he said. "What happens if you say Samson?" I knocked the paper out of his hand. His smile disappeared. For a second, he looked angry. Then he saw my face. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay. Sorry." I locked the office door and told him he had to leave before 10. He stayed until 9:40. Nothing happened while he was there. Of course it didn't. He got bored. Then uncomfortable. Then embarrassed for me. I could see it happen. At 9:35 he stood. "Get through tonight," he said. "Tomorrow call me. We'll figure something else out." "Okay. I mean it." "I know." At the door he turned back. "You sure you're good?" "No." "Yeah." He drove to the gate. I let him out. He flashed his headlights twice as a joke and honked once. I locked the gate behind him. Then I watched his taillights disappear. At 10:02, the radio crackled. I picked it up. "Larkspur Night 1, radio check." Static. Then Trevor's voice said, "You forgot to lock the gate." I stared at the radio. I had watched him leave. I had locked the gate. On camera 1, the gate was closed. "Nate," Trevor said. "Open up. I'm still inside." I set the microphone down. My hands went cold. On camera 8, which showed the rear service path, a figure walked between the barn and the reptile house. Trevor. Same jacket. Same baseball cap. Same uneven stride from an old knee injury. He stopped under the security light and looked toward the camera. Then he lifted one hand and pointed behind him. The radio clicked. "I think somebody's back here." I did not answer. He turned and walked out of frame. Camera 9 flickered. Trevor appeared near the south holding pens. "I'm not kidding," his voice said through the radio. "There's a cage back here that wasn't here before." I stood. The rule came back to me. If you count 38, do not count again. This wasn't a count. I told myself that. This was Trevor. My friend. A real person who had been inside the property less than half an hour earlier. I called his cell phone. It rang once, then went to voicemail. On camera 9, Trevor crouched beside the holding pens. He looked scared now. The radio clicked. "Nate, it has my name on it." I unplugged the radio. His voice stopped mid-breath. For a moment, I felt relief. Then the office phone rang. I let it ring. Camera 9 showed Trevor standing again. He looked toward the office. Then, slowly, he began walking closer to the camera. Not down the path. Toward the lens. Into the fence. His face pressed against the camera housing until the whole screen filled with one eye. Then camera 9 went black. I stayed inside. That may be the worst thing I've ever done. I stayed inside because the rules said to stay inside. Because every time I broke even the edge of a rule, the place noticed. Because I had watched a thing look like Walt. I had heard my mother. I had seen myself in reflections. Because I knew it wasn't Trevor. I knew it. I knew it until morning. At 6:10, the real Trevor called me. I almost dropped the phone when I saw his name. He was at home. He had driven straight there after leaving Larkspur. He wanted to apologize for pushing me. He said he had been thinking about my face when he joked about the rules and felt like an ass. I sat on the office floor and listened to him talk. Then I said, "You didn't come back?" "What?" "After you left." "No." "You didn't call on the radio?" "What radio?" I told him I had to go. I didn't tell him what happened. I never told him. After that, I stopped trusting faces completely. That is a strange way to live. You don't realize how much of ordinary life depends on believing a face is attached to the person it belongs to. A coworker at the gate. A friend on camera. Your mother in a blue robe. Your own reflection in dark glass. At Larkspur, a face became just another sound. Something the place could make. The final week started with Walt giving me a new copy of the rules. It was the same list, but written on fresh paper. His handwriting again. Neater this time. I asked what happened to the old one. Two-handled, he said. What does that mean? It knew where your eyes went. I didn't ask anything else. He added one line at the bottom. Not numbered. Just written beneath Rule 7. If you see someone in an empty cage, do not let them see that you recognize them. I read it 3 times. Has that happened before? Walt capped the pen. Yes. With who? He didn't answer. Walt. He looked at me. You want the truth? Yes. No, you don't. He was right. But I kept looking at him, so he told me anyway. He said the winter the zoo failed, the caretaker was a man named Brendan Vale. Local guy. Quiet. Good with animals. He stayed on after the owner got sick because someone had to feed what was left. The storm blocked the road for 9 days. When county deputies finally got in, they found dead animals, frozen pipes, broken locks, and no Brendan. Not at first. They found him on the 3rd day, curled inside one of the temporary holding cages near the south fence. The cage was locked from the outside. He was alive barely, but he had frostbite and no memory of entering it. At the hospital, he kept asking how many cages they had counted. He died 2 days later. Walt paused there. Then he said, They found his voice in the radio after that. I didn't know what to say. Walt took the rule sheet and taped it above the desk this time, where I could see it without touching it. I'm retiring in January, he said. The words startled me more than they should have. What? I'm done. Who takes over? He looked at me. No. I laughed once. It was not a real laugh. No. I didn't say you should. You were thinking it. I was thinking you lasted longer than most. That's not a qualification. It is here. I'm not doing this forever. Nobody thinks they are. That sentence stayed with me. Nobody thinks they are. On December 18th, the park announced the demolition contract had been approved. Angie told me in the office before shift. She looked relieved. Spring, she said. They start in spring if weather holds. That's good. Yeah. She was packing files into blue plastic crates. Animal records. Site maps. Incident logs. Everything that needed to be moved to the district archive before demolition. I noticed one crate was labeled night materials. What's that? She followed my gaze. Old logs. Can I see them? No. That was too fast. Why not? Because Walt said not to. Walt doesn't own them. No, she said. But he understands them. After she left, I opened the crate. I'm not proud of that either. But by then, fear had become mixed with something else. I wanted to understand enough to stop being led around by rules I didn't write. Inside were 13 night logs. Different years. Different handwriting. Some official. Some notebooks. Some loose pages tied with string. I read them in pieces through the evening, between patrol and radio checks. At first, they were normal. Weather. Fence damage. Generator trouble. Trespassers. Then the same phrases started appearing. Counted wrong. Lights off 10. Voice from Wolf Run. Bowl empty before placed feed. Camera 12 turned. Gate not gate. Do not answer. Do not recount. The oldest log was from before the zoo closed. That surprised me. I thought whatever was happening started after the animals died. But an entry from 14 years earlier mentioned a tiger that Larkspur never officially had. March 3rd. Guest asked where we moved the tiger? We never had a tiger. Found striped hair in drain. Another entry. March 19th. Children laughing in reptile house after closing. No children on site. Rosie agitated. Staff heard their own names from vents. And another. April 2nd. Samson refused back den. Would not approach south wall. Kept looking at empty cage. I sat back. Empty cage. Singular. The phrase had been there before the closures. Before the deaths. Before Brendan Vale. I kept reading. Near the bottom of the crate, I found a map. Not the laminated map I use for counts. An older site plan, hand-drawn in pencil. It showed the zoo before several expansions. 29 enclosures. Then 34. Then 36. Never 37. I unfolded newer plans. 36. The current official property inventory. 36 animal enclosures. Not 37. My hands went numb. I took out the laminated count map from the binder. 37. I compared them. The extra enclosure on Walt's map was not the south holding pen. Not quarantine. Not the reptile house. It was the night office. The room I was sitting in. On Walt's map, someone had drawn a square around the office in red marker and numbered it 37. For a while I just stared at it. Count the cages at 8 p.m., 12 a.m., and 4 a.m. There are 37 empty cages. The night office was part of the count. I had been counting myself inside an empty cage every night without knowing it. I don't know why that realization frightened me so badly. Maybe because it changed what empty meant. Maybe because I had always thought the cages were empty because there was nothing in them. But if the office was a cage, and I was inside it, then empty did not mean unoccupied. It meant available. It meant waiting. It meant something could look in and decide whether you belonged there yet. At midnight I counted 37. Including the office. I wrote 37 in the log and tried not to think about what my hand was emitting. At 1:08, camera 12 showed movement. The quarantine room was dim on the monitor. At first, I saw only the concrete floor and kennel doors. Then a man stepped into view. He was facing away from the camera. He wore a brown jacket with a National Park Service patch. Gray hair under a hat. Walt. I turned the monitor toward the wall. My heart was beating hard. Then the office phone rang. I did not answer. The radio clicked. I unplugged it before a voice came through. That was not what the rule said. The rule said unplug if the caller used my full legal name at 2:13. This was 1:08. This was camera 12. This was Walt inside quarantine, which meant turn the monitor and write feed room secure. I wrote it. The pen dragged across the paper. Feed room secure. From the turn monitor, very softly, Walt said, "Good." I froze. The monitors had no speaker on camera 12. I had checked. The voice came again. "Nate, that's good." "Name." I did not answer. "Nate, I need you to listen. It's learning the office." I stared at the log. "It knows you know." The voice was exactly Walt. Rough. Tired. Close. "Look at the rule sheet." I did not want to. My eyes moved anyway. The rules were taped above the desk. The 7th rule looked different. Not at first. Then I realized the last line had changed. If there are 2 bulls, return to the office and wait for Walt. The word Walt had been crossed out. In its place, someone had written, "Wait for yourself." I stood so fast the chair rolled backward. The office lights flickered. On the turn monitor, Walt whispered, "Don't let it right where you can read." I grabbed the rule sheet and tore it down. The paper was warm. I folded it without looking at the words and shoved it into the desk drawer. Then I turned every monitor off except camera 1. I did not sleep, but I lost time. At 2:13, the radio was still unplugged. It crackled anyway. No power. No lights on the display. Just sound from a dead box. "Larkspur Night 1," a voice said. Not dispatch. Not Walt. Not my mother. Me. My voice, but calmer. Older maybe. "Larkspur Night 1, radio check." I pressed both hands over my ears. The voice continued through my fingers. "Larkspur Night 1, please confirm status." Silence. Then, "I know you're scared." I closed my eyes. "That's normal." It sounded like a recording I might leave for myself. Gentle. Reasonable. Almost kind. "You did well. You followed most of them." Most. The word found every mistake. Saying Walt's name. Opening the gate for Trevor. Answering the landline. Whispering at 2:17. Reading the old logs. "You can leave," my voice said. "But you have to count first." I opened my eyes. Camera 1 no longer showed the front gate. It showed the office. From above, I could see myself standing by the desk, hands over my ears. Behind me, the office door was open. I turned. The door was closed. On the screen, it was open. A figure stood outside it. Not in the room. At the threshold. Waiting. The figure was me. Same coat. Same jeans. Same tired face. On the monitor, I watched myself outside the office raise one hand and knock. At the same moment, something knocked on the real door. 3 times. Not hard. Polite. The radio said, "Let me finish the shift." I could not breathe. The thing at the door knocked again. The office clock read 2:17. Of course it did. The dead radio whispered, "You don't have to be in there anymore." I looked at the cage map on the desk. 37. The office was circled in red. An empty cage. I understood then what it wanted, or thought I did. It didn't want to break in. It wanted me to step out. It wanted me to make the office empty in the way it understood empty. It wanted a vacancy. The doorknob turned once. Stopped. The voice outside said my full legal name. Nathan Robert Wilkes. The radio said it too. The office phone rang. The receipt printer clicked. From the monitors, from the walls, from the floor under the concrete, voices began saying names. Not all mine. Samson. Mila. Henry. Rosie. Old Man Dusk. Brendan Vale. Walter Elias Harlan. Trevor Massey. My mother's name. Names I knew. Names I didn't. Names said in voices that sounded tired of being remembered. I went to the breaker panel and shut off the outside lights. Then the inside lights. The office went dark except for the red glow of the emergency exit sign. The voices stopped. I stood in the dark with one hand on the breaker panel and one hand over my mouth. 10 minutes. That was the rule for 38. I had not counted 38, but I did it anyway. After 10 minutes, the office was quiet. The clock read 2:27. The radio was silent. The door was closed. Camera 1 showed the front gate again. I did not turn the other monitors back on. I stayed like that until 5:15, when it was time for the bowl. I almost skipped it. I think that is important. By then, I had followed enough rules to know that skipping one was not safer than obeying it. But I also knew the rules could be changed. The paper had changed. Or something had made it look changed. Either way, words were no longer solid. Still, before sunrise, one scoop in the silver bowl. I took the feed from the closet. The smell turned my stomach. I walked to the reptile house with my flashlight pointed straight ahead. The sky was beginning to pale, just barely. Snow creaked under my boots. The whole zoo felt like it was holding still. Dorby waited at the end of the service path. One bull sat on the step. Just one. I almost cried when I saw that. Relief can be dangerous. It makes you careless. I lifted the scoop and tipped the feed into the bowl without looking inside. The kibble rattled against metal. Then something in the bowl rattled back. Not kibble. Something small and hard. I should have walked away. The rule was clear. Do not look into the bowl. I had obeyed it every morning. I had no reason to stop. Except the sound was familiar. A plastic clatter. Like the cheap medical ID bracelet my mother wore at the facility. I stood there in the gray morning with the empty zoo behind me and the reptile house door in front of me, and I thought of my mother calling from the common room phone, asking when I was coming to visit. I thought of the bills. I thought of the receipt with her birth date. I thought of the figure in the blue robe behind the wolf fence. I thought, just for 1 second, that maybe something real had been taken. So I looked. It was not her bracelet. It was my name tag. The plastic one Walt had given me on my first day. And Wilkes. Night security. I didn't even know I had lost it. It lay at the bottom of the bowl under the feed, cracked down the middle. Behind me, the reptile house door opened. Just a little. I did not turn around. A voice from inside whispered, "Now we know where to put it." The door closed. I don't remember walking back to the office. I remember sitting at the desk. I remember the monitors being on, though I had never turned them back on. I remember camera 12 showing quarantine empty. I remember the front gate camera showing Walt's truck pulling in at 5:46. Headlights twice. One honk. When Walt came inside, he stopped just past the doorway. He looked at me. Then at the rule sheet torn and folded on the desk. Then at the name tag in my hand. "You looked," he said. I nodded. He closed his eyes. Just for a second. "What happens now?" I asked. He didn't answer. That scared me more than if he had said anything else. Walt drove me home that morning because I couldn't trust myself behind the wheel. He didn't lecture me. He didn't ask what I saw. He didn't tell me it would be okay. When we pulled up outside my apartment, he kept both hands on the steering wheel and looked straight ahead. "You don't come back tonight," he said. "Am I fired?" "No." "What then?" "You're marked." The word felt old. Too dramatic for him. That made it worse. "What does that mean?" "It means if you go back before I know what changed, you may not leave the right way." "The right way?" He turned to me then. "There are worse things than not leaving." I stayed home for 3 nights. On the first night, I slept with every light on. On the second, I drove to my mother's facility and sat with her for 2 hours while she watched a nature show with the volume too low to hear. She knew me that day. She held my hand and asked why I looked so thin. On the third night, my apartment phone rang. I don't have an apartment phone. There is no landline in my unit. The sound came from the kitchen wall. One ring. Then another. Then my own voice said, very faintly through the drywall, "Barksper night 1 clear." I left and slept in my truck outside a Walmart. The next morning I called Walt. No answer. I called again. Nothing. I called Angie. She answered on the fourth ring. Have you heard from Walt? I asked. There was a pause. He's at the site. Now? He was supposed to meet the contractor at 9. Why? I looked at the clock. It was 11:22. Is he answering? No. I figured reception was bad. Don't go there alone, I said. What? Angie, don't go there alone. She didn't laugh. That told me enough. I drove to Larkspur. I know Walt told me not to come back. I know. But he had come for me when the office disappeared. He had shown me the tunnel. He had shoved me through the service gate when something called his full name. I wasn't going to leave him there. The zoo looked normal in daylight. That was its cruelest trick. The front gate stood open. Walt's truck was parked near the office. Angie's car was not there yet. The contractor hadn't arrived, or had already left. I parked outside the gate and walked in. The office door was open. The monitors were off. The night log sat on the desk. On the open page, in Walt's handwriting, was one line. Counted 38 at 9:06 a.m. Below it, in handwriting that looked like mine, someone had written, Maintenance. I found Walt's hat in the back room beside the open floor hatch. I did not go down. I called Angie again and told her to bring rangers, police, anybody. Then I stood outside the office in the weak winter sun and waited. While I waited, I heard animals moving. Not at night. Not through the cameras. In daylight. The otter pools splashed. Something paced in the wolf run. A bird beat its wings against wire. From the reptile house, glass tapped from the inside. One enclosure at a time, the empty cages remembered what they were for. I stood in the entrance plaza and did not look at any of them. The official search found nothing. No Walt. No footprints beyond the office. No sign of struggle. The tunnel under the floor led to the feed shed, just like he said, but there were no tracks in the dirt except old ones nobody could identify clearly. Search dogs refused to enter the reptile house. One handler said later the dogs acted like they were being asked to walk into deep water. The park closed the site completely after that. They put new chains on the gates. They took down the security cameras. They told me not to speak to reporters. There were no reporters. Walt Harlan became a missing person case with no suspects and no evidence. Angie quit in January. Trevor transferred to a district 2 counties over. The demolition contract was delayed again. Officially, because of winter access and budget review. I still get paid. That is the part one don't tell people at first. Every 2 weeks, the same deposit appears in my account. Larkspur Night Ops. I called payroll the first time it happened. The woman on the phone said I was listed as active seasonal security through the end of the fiscal year. I told her that was wrong. She said she would flag it. The deposit came again 2 weeks later. Then again. I stopped calling. In February, an envelope arrived at my apartment with no return address. Inside was a key ring. Front gate. Office. Gift shop. Reptile house door B. South service gate. A folded sheet of yellow legal paper. The handwriting was mine. Not close to mine. Mine. At the top it said, Night rules for empty cages. There were 8 rules now. The first 7 were the same. The 8th said, If Walt arrives before sunrise, do not let him know you recognize him. I burned the paper in my sink. The next morning, it was on my kitchen table again. I have not gone back to Larkspur since the day Walt disappeared. That is the truth. But some mornings, when I wake before sunrise, my apartment smells like wet straw and old feed. Sometimes the microwave clock reads 2:17 even after I reset it. Sometimes, when my upstairs neighbor walks across the floor, the sound is not footsteps. It is pacing. Last week, I visited my mother. She was having one of her bad days. She thought I was my father at first, then her brother, then a nurse she didn't like. I sat with her anyway. I told her about the weather. I told her I was looking for another job. I told her I was sleeping better, which was a lie. When I stood to leave, she grabbed my wrist. Her hand was small and dry and stronger than I expected. She looked straight at me. For a moment, she was completely herself. "Nate," she said, "don't feed the second bowl." I hadn't told her about the bowls. I hadn't told anyone. I asked her what she meant, but she just looked past me toward the hallway, where an aide was pushing an empty wheelchair under the humming fluorescent lights. Then my mother smiled in a way I did not know. Not cruel. Not kind. Just familiar. Like something had finally learned how to use her face. I left without saying goodbye. That night, the keyring was on my kitchen table. Beside it was a silver bowl. Just one. For now.